Andor, Ürmös from REGIO and Eduard, Bonet from UNICEF. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
So we asked you previously to briefly introduce us, please, to your work from the aspect of subnational survey data on African migrant minorities and the data gaps you identified, the data needs, the knowledge gaps. So from this aspect, how would you feel you could use this kind of project what we are building here? What are the thematic or target group-wise gaps or any other needs that you would like to have fulfilled from any other sources, and hopefully this project can be some kind of answer to your already identified questions. I give the floor to Andor.
Thank you very much. My name is Ürmös. I'm coming from REGIO, from the European Commission. And just for the sake of introduction, I'd just like to tell you what I'm doing. I'm responsible for EU funds coordination in the field of social inclusion, in particular with the infrastructure development. So I'm not working in the field of social fund, I'm more working on a regional fund perspective, which is about the infrastructure development. So it's about the hospitals, schools, kindergartens, and any other infrastructure development which contributes to social inclusion. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it was really very promising and interesting. I just would like to highlight some of the dilemma what we are facing, and then maybe you can tell me how to proceed. Because one dilemma is that we are talking about cohesion policy with the EU funds, which is about actually cohesion, reducing inequalities. Inequalities between different groups of the society, and how the inequality is measured or identified, that's our, let's say, first dilemma. Because for us, as you can see in many documents, for us the territorial and social cohesion, it's about the socioeconomic indicators. So we are very broadly using socioeconomic indicators to understand, let's say, inequalities at the national level and beyond, obviously, as much as we can beyond. But what is the role of the ethnic data, or data which are pointing out actually, let's say, the situation of people with a migrant background or some other target groups? That's a difficult question. Why? Because the target group-based approach, as we call it in this kind of EU jargon, it has some, let's say, particular disadvantages. What is the problem with that? The main problem is that as soon as we are highlighting, let's say, some of the particular target groups in the cohesion policy, then immediately we need to understand what are the responses of the cohesion policy to this, to improve the situation of the particular target group. So in very simple terms, what you are doing with the Roma population in different countries, what you are doing with the migrant population, what you are doing with the population, let's say, people with disabilities. And then we are facing the question then, okay, these are target groups, but maybe for us, it's not the most important question is the target group. The most important question is the inequality, which is measured by, let's say, again, with the socioeconomic indicators. So this is the first dilemma what we are facing. And before I'm going to a very detailed discussion on that, obviously member states are using both. In many countries, you see the very widespread use of the socioeconomic indicators, even in territorial means. So the territory inequality is one of the probably most important angle of that. But in some other countries, and let's name here, for example, Slovakia, where, for example, the use of ethnic indicators is very strong. As some of the colleagues you may have heard about this Roma Atlas, what the UNDP prepared for Slovakia and is still in use. This is something about the so-called Roma dance areas of Slovakia, where actions should, let's say, focus on the improving of the situation of Roma communities, which led to very specific Roma actions in the Slovak cohesion policy, with some disadvantages, as, just to highlight one angle of that, unfortunately we are building segregated schools because of the, this kind of ethnicized focus. But I don't want to take side of this ethnic or socioeconomic approach. I'm just saying that this is a dilemma in front of us, and we are trying to find a solution, if I can say that in this very cliche type of way. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think pass it to Eduard.
How long do you have?
As we are lagging behind the schedule.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So let me first quickly try to give a little bit of background on what we do that is relevant for now the discussion.
Yes,
I think so. I will talk mostly we will focus on what I would call the pre-harmonization work in UNICEF and globally in the region, particularly in the region in Europe and South and Central Asia. And we do this mostly concentrated working on administrative data and to try to fill data gaps around the standards. And standards on definitions and recommendations, I mean, relevant for child issues and child rights. I will comment a little bit on the work that we are doing. I mentioned yesterday in the presentation in connection to mix, the harmonization, the post-harmonization of mix that we are doing. I will share some additional information on this later. But let me tell a little bit more on the pre-harmonization part of the work, because I will link it at the end with the request and the suggestion from our side on how we could see this fitting better our needs. One of the flagship projects that now we are involved in is in the coordination of the third phase of the child guarantee of the European Commission. As you know, probably, well, this is about ensuring that every child at risk of poverty or social exclusion has access to basic services. Basically, we are building now partnerships to work on this closer from the data angle with OECD. They have a lot of work going on family support, for example, also from a methodological point of view. And also we are also strengthening the partnership we already have with the FRA to work on this. What we have been doing apart from this now and the focus on subnational, the subnational angle of ethnic and migrant minority data is again on mix. I will not talk about the Roma service that I talked about yesterday, just to emphasize two additional points. One that I mentioned quickly yesterday. With the regular mix service, one can also extract information on the children left behind by migration, of one of the parents at least. And also in, I would say 95% of the mixed service, there is also information on the proxy of the ethnic group, of the respondent and the family, through the language spoken. The mixed service, the respondent at the very beginning chooses, it's not, we translate the tools obviously, the customers, but the respondent also choose at the beginning of the interview the language that wants the interview to take place on. And this is also recorded. Then the question comes also on what is the language spoken on the phone. And this is used to disaggregate all the information afterwards. But another part of the work that we do on pre-harmonization is, for example, just to give an example, the collaboration that we have been having with Eurostat, the Asylum and Managed Migration Working Group. And in 2018, we submitted a joint paper with UNHCR to make a number of proposals to change the regulation on providing data. The Eurostat uses to provide data information on children affected by migration and refugees. Happily, there has been a very long process going on through the European Parliament, also because it was interrupted by the elections. But happily, most of the recommendations have been adopted according to the decision of the Parliament, and they are tapping on aspects like, for example, providing more disaggregates or more frequency reporting on data like, for example, unaccompanied children and asylum seekers. And then finally, just to close this part, the biggest elements that we have now on the table is one recently approved task force that we have advocated for in the Conference of European Statisticians to work on statistics on children, adolescents, and youth, particularly from the angle of the standards. So looking at what are the data gaps first, and then what is the role of standards, or how standards can contribute to address these data gaps. From the point of view, answering two questions, are there standards and concepts and definitions adequate to fill these gaps? If so, as it happens in some cases, What are the challenges, the barriers for countries, statistical offices particularly, not applying them? No? And the examples that we gave in this paper that was a joint work with Eurostat, UNFPA, and now OECD, and then there will be 4 member countries working on this: Canada, Austria, Armenia, and Poland during the coming 3 years. So the examples that we gave were on violence against children, where there are no standards globally. Then children in institutions, where there are no standards, but there is not an effort, so to say, to provide standards, because numerically, from statistics point of view, there are not enough kids to motivate work on this from national statistical offices angle. And the third example that we gave was on children with disabilities. There are standards, but despite the availability of standards, they are not applied. So this is the kind of work we do. And then let me comment quickly before making our suggestion on the work on post-harmonization of the mix. As I mentioned, there are over 115 surveys, 330 surveys across 115 countries of mix in the last 24 years. Despite the approach that mix is a program, it's a household survey program that provides information on a number of indicators. The indicators have evolved, have changed slightly, and then there is a process of customization that makes things a little bit different. But just to give an example of the scope of the work that I'm afraid only thinking of what is coming to you in the third objective that you have ahead and the fourth for the playground that you call. We have been working on this harmonization in this very narrowly framed world of mix for 3 years and something and a half. Luckily, we found 2 years and a half ago iPhones. I don't know if you're familiar with the unit. It's from the Institute of Social Research and Data Innovation in the University of Minnesota. They have a lot of experience working on this. And I just wanted to tell you that the program ahead with them is it's 1 year quite intense work to harmonize 190 variables of mix from mix 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the first 2 waves of mix are not going to be harmonized. It will be too big the challenge. The difference with the indicators we find in the mid-1990s would not make it relevant. And this is not comprising the whole set of indicators of mix. Just a small number. There are 3 processes by which this is, 3 stages by which this is done. One is what we call pre-processing. There is a translation and data formatting. They work, they customize their algorithms. That way they already refined in the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years to do this work. Then there is what they call the standardization, where they do the data dictionaries, corresponding to the questionnaires, to the tools that have to be harmonized. And then finally there is the integration process. So generating the harmonization codes and all the background and information of variables. Also harmonize the geographical units, for example. It's something like that. And finally produce the client information in form of a web documentation. And just to close, so our from a UNICEF angle, the EMM registry would be post-harmonization, would be really serving our data needs and information needs, not only UNICEF, but also from the stakeholders and the community working on child rights. We think if it could do 2 things. One, from a generic point of view, providing information on what is available in the registry, what is available in relation to children, so people 0 to 17 years old, how many indicators, variables do we have relevant to them. On adolescents, people 10 to 19 years old, and on youth, people 15 to 24 years old. These are the standard global definitions by these age groups. And then for each one of them, I don't think we need to add anything else to the categories that you have for the third working group already. In terms of the integration, they are relevant, as long as we can look at these groups. And then in particular, what we serve now, UNICEF and more in a narrow group of countries, EU countries, those embracing the child guarantee work. I think it would be if we could have information on, but this is a more particular, more narrow request, no? We could have information on the 4 target groups of the child guarantee, which are children in precarious family situations. There is a definition in the feasibility study paper on who are these. Children in institutions. This will be really difficult to have, I know. Migrants and refugees, and children with disabilities and special needs. These are the 4 groups, quite well defined as much as possible. And then the areas that would have overlap, I'm sure, with the areas of the working group 3, would be the ones mentioned in the child guarantee. No? So what basic services have these particular groups of children need to have? Free access to healthcare, free access to education, free early childhood education and care, decent housing, and adequate nutrition. And particularly this last one is a really big data app across European countries, because one of the only sources of information comes from UNICEF, if I'm not wrong, on the couple of questions on items, vegetables and fruits and proteins that have not been affordable. That's it. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much.